Welcome, and thank you for this opportunity to speak at this year's FPTA conference. My name is John Shug, and I represent our business development team for StructureCare here in Florida. And today we're going to be talking about parking garages. I'll also be discussing some common deterioration, hazardous conditions that can develop, and then what we can do to help mitigate those risks for both yourself and for your clients. So as we break into the agenda today, we're going to start by reviewing the different parking structure systems, right? So understand what garage particularly are in your portfolio. Secondly, we'll talk about the garage deterioration and the consequences of neglecting those conditions. And then lastly, talk about preventative maintenance, right? How can we maintain this garage and systematically approach it in the best way possible? So why is knowing my garage construction type important? Great question. There are three separate types of parking garages that you might run into. There's prefabricated or precast concrete. There's also field poured or cast in place concrete, and then hybrid, which might be a combination of both. So precast concrete. Concrete is great in compression, but it's weak in tension, whereas steel is vice versa. So when you add these two things together, you create a member that's utilizing the strength of both materials. Now, they're typically produced in a controlled manufacturing facility where there's a specific mix of concrete that will be poured into various forms that are embedded with reinforced steel. Think of this as pouring cake batter into a baking sheet. These forms shape the precast components of your garage. A controlled manufacturing environment is advantageous in this process because it increases the overall product quality and control. Precast manufacturers are able to be precise with their curing process, their concrete mixes, and create durable, high-quality concrete. Once this curing process is complete, the individual components are then transported to the job site, as you can see here with this big old green truck. So a key identifier that your garage will be made of precast is that the individual double T pieces. We call them double T's because if you look at the elevation view, it looks like two-letter T's are placed alongside each other. Next, we'll talk about cast-in-place garages. These are field-poured or cast-in-place design. As opposed to precast, the garages are poured, formed, and cured on-site. Some quick facts about cast-in-place are that all components are cast on the job site. They're subject to the greatest varying conditions, which could possibly affect quality. And it's largely dependent on general contractor, field conditions, and the available labor pool at the time. Primary types of deterioration. So now that you know what parking structure we're working with or that are in your portfolio, we can transition to talking about the types of deterioration and how you can proactively manage them. So there are three reasons that concrete deteriorates. One is chemical reactions. This attacks when salt water or chemicals are allowed to penetrate the concrete, exposing it to chlorides. You'll see how this occurs on some of our next slides. Next would be waterproofing failures to components like sealants, traffic coatings, and this can occur from a multitude of different issues. This could be from improper installation to aging or even excessive temperature swings in vehicular traffic. And then accidents, we all know that they can occur, and when they do, they can affect the structural integrity of the garage. Chloride exposure. So here I have a visual that I'll walk us through as I discuss how water and these different chlorides can affect that reinforcing steel inside of the concrete. So concrete in its natural state is alkaline. It's a passive environment. When concrete is strong and robust material, it does have many micro cracks and air pockets that can allow water and chemicals to absorb within those voids and saturate the concrete. I like to think of concrete as a hard sponge, but over time, these voids can expand and contract, That allows water and chlorides to reach the embedded reinforcement steel, and what was once a passive environment turns into an acidic environment. This acidic environment accelerates deterioration through corrosion and rusting of the steel, and that eventually leads to delamination and hazardous spalls. Just to put this into context, when embedded steel comes in contact with water and chlorides, it can expand up to 7 times the original size. It's important to understand this because, as you'll see later in this presentation, there are steps that we can take to mitigate these issues and address them before they progress. This isn't a picture of the Rainforest Cafe. This is actually a picture of a precast concrete garage experiencing waterproofing failures. And more than likely, this was an expansion joint that was allowing a waterfall really to seep through to the level below. So waterproofing failures to components like sealants and traffic coatings, like I said, this can occur from improper installation, but also occur through just service life and aging, excessive temperature swings, and vehicular traffic. All right, so waterproofing deterioration. Waterproofing systems include, for one, joint sealants. And I'll show you an example of different joint sealants here. You can see how proper sealants will adhere to the concrete, creating a waterproofing barrier. On the right, you can see failure in this sense. Either the joint wasn't properly installed, or it's past its useful service life. These sealants should be replaced generally every 7 to 10 years. Next, we'll discuss traffic coatings. Normal traffic coating wear is apparent here, whether it be from vehicular traffic or if it's past its useful service life. When the coating has been breached, as you can see above, water is able to infiltrate these areas and can actually get trapped underneath. This accelerates concrete deterioration. Another note to touch on here is that they're usually more expensive to install, and they require a really good amount of maintenance for upkeep. It's difficult to inspect these more often than not because it can actually hide deteriorating conditions below, impacting the concrete. Next, we'll discuss sealers. People often confuse sealants and sealers. The latter is either a topical or penetrating treatment meant to inhibit water penetration. Sealants, on the other hand, are the materials installed between the two adjacent elements, like precast to precast or precast to cast in place, concrete to metals, like a window. And then lastly, expansion joints. And here are some examples of different expansion joints. They're installed in parking garages and allow for the natural movement that occurs within the expansion and the contraction of concrete structures. Over time, these expansion joint materials, just like the parking deck, can deteriorate due to their exposure to the elements. When this happens, water infiltration occurs, as well as undue stress that can compromise the integrity of the expansion joint and the structure. So just to recap, we talked about chemical reactions and attacks. We talked about waterproofing failures, and now we're on to accidents and miscellaneous damages. This is a picture of my first driver's test, where I eventually got my license. But this is something that happens within our industry, right? We have car accidents, and if you've been here long enough, this probably doesn't surprise you. It's important to remember, though, that any accidents that occur can affect the structural integrity of the garage. There's also miscellaneous, and these photographs show some of those conditions that you might notice. Rusted draining system, faded line striping, and these are all things that should be prioritized and addressed. So now that we've discussed our what, and it's time to dive into why. So why is all this important to you? And what strategy exists, right, for you and your team moving forward? As you know, the cost of some repairs can escalate exponentially with time. This is an interesting graph that actually represents that projected cost multiplier based on conditions and time. These conditions are sequential from a parking garage that was suffering from deferred maintenance over time. And here are the cost multipliers that we associated with the level of time that went before maintenance was implemented. So historically, deferring the treatment of a condition like this can significantly reduce the useful life, or as we call it, the service life of the garage. This is what we call a deterioration curve. The top of the curve starts at excellent with a brand new garage. The white line is the service life if you do absolutely nothing. The blue line then shows an extended life provided deferred investment in repair. This often occurs when conditions have existed for a long time and costs are much more difficult to budget for. Here's the good news, right? So as we see with the yellow line, these conditions I just showed you can all be prevented or at least mitigated. So let's show you the steps that you can take to help mitigate these events from occurring, or at the very least, eliminate unexpected surprises. All right, let's move me down here just a little bit because we're going to discuss a case study for a proactive approach. So let's take garage A. Garage A is poorly maintained. We're not having routine inspections on the garage. There's occasional repair work to fix symptoms, but we're not really understanding the root cause. There's no annual pressure washing being had, and there aren't any funds allocated to address conditions that may become major issues later on. Garage B, on the other hand, is proactively maintained. There are routine inspections being had. There's a maintenance budget to address small developing conditions in their infancy. There are also annual pressure washes to remove chlorides and a plan in place to mitigate damages. Now, fast forward 10 years in this case study, and let's move me over to the right. They didn't teach me this at Florida State. I must have missed this lecture, but the fast-forwarded approach here is that the poorly maintained garage is going to be a potential liability to ownership. Hazardous conditions are going to develop throughout that garage. It's going to have poor aesthetics, missed service life replacements and maintenance needs, made restorative repairs necessary, and then the service life is going to be cut down dramatically. Now, garage B, on the other hand, is proactively maintained. It has safe conditions for cars and customers. It's in good condition aesthetically. Annual expenses are uniform, predictable, and planned, and its anticipated service life can really extend beyond 60 years. So how can an owner be proactive? Number one, you're going to want to have a plan. So the components of a good plan, we believe have 3 pillars. That first pillar is going to be assessment and prioritization. The second pillar is repair and maintenance. And the third pillar is going to be education and consultation. And I'll explain what each 3 of these pillars really mean and how to pull them all together here. So the elements of the assessment and prioritization. Assess, prioritize, and implement. You're going to want to identify the conditions through inspections. Then you'll want to formulate a strategy to reduce risk. And then lastly, you're going to want to execute on a strategic plan. So there's value in finding all conditions, catching them in their infancy, having a plan to inspect this garage regularly, because every 5 or 10 years really isn't enough. It's simple to address a symptom, route and seal a crack, for example. But why did that crack form in the first place? If you don't address the root cause of an issue, you may constantly be repairing the same conditions. Take all your findings and prioritize this. Safety. So certain organizations might have a really strong emphasis on safety this year. The structure. Deteriorating conditions often put stress on a building that wasn't designated to carry. So knowing if your garage is structurally compromised or not. And lastly, cost. If we defer fixing a condition that might cost $5,000 today, will that cost escalate? It's important to know that. Will that condition worsen and require $50,000 in 3 years? So understanding repair and maintenance. Routine maintenance should be completed every year. You can equate this to a tire rotation or an oil change on your vehicle. So to stick with the vehicle metaphor then, new tires or windshield wipers are your service life replacements. We believe that if you take care of the first two, your restorative repairs will really become quite small. The challenge is in the diligence need to perform those first two, routine maintenance and service life. This brings us into education and consultation. The last component of a successful proactive maintenance strategy. For owners, they need to be educated on what future expenses to plan for. It's helpful to consult with experts on what liability and safety risks you might be exposed to. And then for the on-site facilities team, you can learn about what structure you're maintaining, understand the clues of what to look for and how to inspect that structure. And in the case of emergency, it's critical that you have a point of contact to consult with. So our key takeaways here. Understanding garage construction types helps us predict deterioration and have a plan for preventative maintenance. 2, slowing down the deterioration process is going to extend the life of your parking garage. It's going to save you money and it's going to mitigate risks compared to neglect. And then last, a well-maintained and regularly scheduled preventative maintenance program is the key to prevention. Thank you all for coming to our Parking Garage 101. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have after listening to this, and have a great new year. Thank you.